Welcome to the Ending Sexploitation Podcast, where we decode sexual harm and provide you with active solutions. I'm your host, Haley McNamara. Well, welcome to this special episode of the End Sexual Exploitation Podcast. I'm Dani Pinter, sitting in for Haley McNamara. Our guest today is Joshua Broome. Joshua is an author, speaker, and advocate for shining a light on the harms of pornography. Joshua, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I have been working alongside you guys for several years now and have learned a lot from you and many other amazing people there at NCOSE. And currently I live in Dallas. Been here for about 3 years. I live here with my wife, Hope, and our 4 kids. And like you said, I write books, I speak in various spheres of influence. And man, it's been amazing to see how just learning from you guys and just being in the fight and partnering with so many amazing people, see both darkness be exposed, but see so much progress.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, your voice has been unbelievably powerful in this conversation. So I just want to thank you for that. And I feel like we've learned so much from you. I also have 4 kids, so that's so funny. We're
Yeah.
sitting here with these big families. So I'm so glad to chat with you about this today, especially because I know we're both concerned for our families. So,
Yeah.
yeah, tell me, we've been discussing, I know for years, sort of like the harms of pornography, and especially as like a public health crisis. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, just that statement in general, the fact that I don't think it should be abrasive or outlandish to say porn should be considered as a public health crisis. I mean, we look at what happened with big tobacco. We see it go from athletes advocating for it, billboards saying this is good for you, this is healthy for you, this is helpful for you, and now you see there's age restrictions. There are warning signs saying, hey, this has been proven through testimony and data that in an astronomical amount, this is harmful for you. And we want to warn you that what you are ingesting, what you are consuming is dangerous. And I think it's not outlandish at all to say the same thing about pornography.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's especially because of the spectrum of harm, right? Like it harms so many people in so many different ways. We see children being exposed to hardcore pornography at such a young age and the fallout from that, their body image issues, the ways boys and girls are treating each other. There's been like a very disturbing rise in children, committing sexual crimes against each other, that correlates to really aggressive pornography use, like addictive pornography use, compulsive pornography use. So there's myriad harms to children. We see harms to adults who are consuming this. We see harms to individuals participating, as performers in this. So yeah, what other harms do you think of when we think about, the public health crisis?
Yeah, I mean, just from, I have a unique perspective in the story, and it's the fact that, there's around 40 people that have died of either overdose or suicide, that they were in the industry at the same time as me. I'm just a little bit over 40 years old, 42 years old, and, there should be those people living their lives. You're, kind of in the pinnacle of their lives, and there's 40 people that have taken their lives, and it's because they tried to get out of the industry and the world would not relent in reminding them, you're not who you're trying to become, you're not who your driver's license or your passport says you are. That's not your identity. Your identity is what we find when we Google your name, and it's attached to this fictitious representation of you on these porn sites. And no matter how hard they tried to change, no matter how hard they tried to do something else, the world was so certain that what they're consuming is real, and it's more real than the realest thing about them. that they couldn't escape that, and they saw, no hope at the end of the tunnel. No matter how hard they tried to do something different, they couldn't be different. And it's just so sad. So I mean, I think just that reality that
Yeah.
people in the industry, they're putting themselves in harm's way, and that they're, you know, leaving themselves susceptible to being harmed and being in abusive relationships where people are being murdered, people are being abused at an astronomical rate because they don't value themselves, they don't see themselves indicative of value, so they end up in a relationship where there's force, fraud, or coercion happening. And in some cases, it's really a pimp. It's not even a boyfriend, but that's the only, point of consistency in your life, and they can't seem to escape that, or drugs, or whatever it might be to numb or escape from the reality that you can't seem to escape from. So I think like that in itself, like that's the reality for most people who end up in the industry long term. And like you were sharing, we have a good friend, Heidi. She talks about the data associated with, if there's an uprising in incestual pornography, and the correlating factor with that is kids are abusing kids. Why? Because they're watching that type of pornography and they're acting it out. In the 90th percentile, there's violence in pornography, and we see people acting out that violence. And at the end of the day, some of the things that we see happen in this world, they're not, your mind doesn't have the ability to come up with the things that people are doing. These are depictions of something you see, and then all of a sudden you feel like you have an appetite to replicate the thing that you see because it gives you some kind of high, some kind of dopamine hit. And then people are doing things that they would never do, that they would never
Yeah.
think, that you would never do to another human being. But you are having, because you're watching this, you're developing this appetite for it, and then you're going and acting it out. So I would just say, I would love to burst the bubble to the person believing that you can consume this without having any impact on people, can't it not having any impact on culture, and ultimately it not having any impact on you. It's really changing the way you think. It's really changing the way you live. It's really changing the boundaries that you used to have. I think it's just the reality. I mean, it's changing the way that we live in today's culture, and it's changing, you know, people are worried about their kids in schools. Girls that are on college campuses, they're worried about being assaulted. I saw a sign. I was flying back from Roanoke, Virginia, and I saw a sign, and it was a women's college, and their only selling point on the billboard said, "Why would you want to come here? Because it's safe."
Wow.
Insinuating that if you can be in an environment where men are not there, you're safe. And you're not talking about just violence. You're talking about rape and violence. So I mean, I
That's
feel like yeah. I mean, it's just really sad.
Yeah, that's so compelling. I mean, you made so many good points. And even just jumping off the last one, I was just listening to the Gottmans, two doctors there, world famous marriage and counseling therapists. And they were talking about, sexual intimacy and how women actually can't like feel aroused and truly feel like a situation is erotic if they don't feel safe. And so it's so ironic that many people will talk about how porn is sort of like increasing our cultural sexuality, and hey, this is an example of how we're so sexually free when it is leading to actually increased negative attitudes of men towards women, increasing sexual violence, and increasing this rape culture, increasing a culture of violence towards women, which then takes away from their ability to have good sexual experiences. So
Yeah.
it's so ironic.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
go
yeah,
ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, and like thinking about that, like you look at, people are getting married less, and they're waiting longer, having less kids, regardless of where you stand on abortion. Like that's a byproduct of how we see sex and how we see the quality of life. And I think like you're saying, the reality is the pornography is changing the way that people see intimacy and sex. and that's having a real impact because we are created to experience that. And when it's suppressed or when it's experienced outside of its original design, the byproduct is chaos.
Yeah, and another thing I want to, kind of jump off that you said was, that it's changing the way we think and it's changing society. And these atrocious acts of sexual violence that we're seeing, they're not happening in vacuum, right? And I think that's the point you made so well, that sort of these troubling things that we're seeing, especially related to sexual violence and predation of children, are not happening in a vacuum. And pornography is a piece of this puzzle because it is changing the way that we view each other and our attitudes. And there's so many studies that back that up. We'll link that to the podcast. We have a good compilation of these studies. But it's just really disturbing. And, I also want to talk about, I think you said 40 people took their lives that you knew from the industry. Is that right? Is that the number?
Yeah.
That's unbelievably disturbing to really think about. And when I've had the real honor to talk to survivors, both of different forms of exploitation, including in the pornography industry. And what I don't think a lot of people realize is many of them have, explained to me that even if they did, agree to participate in pornography, they ended up doing a lot of things or having a lot of things happen to them that they didn't agree with, that there was that force and coercion that you
Yeah.
described. And so that means actually what happened to them was sexual abuse. We understand that if you have sex or someone has sex with you without your consent, that's rape, right? That's sexual abuse. So even if that happens in the middle of a porn set, that's sexual abuse, but now that's recorded and that's online. And that caused such a massive effect on their mental health, knowing that something that really felt abusive is online now.
Yeah, I mean, you like go from the beginning of my time in the industry. I had the same interview that everyone has. With I had one of the biggest agents in the industry, and he sits me down. He asked me three questions: How did I grow up? What am I doing in LA? What do I hope to accomplish? Well, the first question, essentially, you're asking, "Hey, do you come from a broken home?"
What are your
And
vulnerabilities? Yeah.
yeah, well, yeah, it's like, what should have been a red flag.
Yeah.
Well, if you're naively going into this, not thinking about what you're being asked, you just respond. Some people ask me, well, does force, fraud, and coercion happen within the porn industry? Not only does it happen, it's dependent upon it. It's at its very core, it's dependent upon it. And like you're saying, the first scene I did, I signed a piece of paper. Hey, this is how you get paid. Not telling me you're signing away all rights to video, audio, and any imagery. And not only that, you're getting paid a one-time fee. There's no royalties, there's no incentives, there's no money outside of that one-time check you get. But what you're signing is they have the right to sell it to as many third parties forever as they want. So what happens, I do one scene and all of a sudden the photos that were taken on that set, they end up on sex toys, they end up on dating sites, they end up on billboards, they end up on 1-800 numbers or whatever. And all of a sudden I'm like, I didn't consent to any of this. Like, well, you did because you signed the paper that I thought that I was just signing something to get paid.
And that I think people do not understand.
And just yeah, and I was gonna say, like, and lastly, it's just like, and I don't want you to just run with it, but it's like every time I would do a scene, and I would say outside of maybe like 10, 15 times out of 1,000 scenes I did, you would always film the consent after the fact. And I was probably in the industry 3 or 4 years before they started doing that.
Yeah.
And it's almost like, when you see a caution hot on the coffee at McDonald's, you're like, no, duh. Well, that's there because someone got burned and someone sued. So
That's
obviously
yeah.
so obviously something happened, but at the end of the scene, again, coercion, hey, we're going to film the consent at the beginning of the scene so that your makeup's all good, you're not disheveled, we're doing this for you, we're doing you a favor. So state your name, state that you give consent to everything that happened today. Did you Did you have a good time? What's the date? And then you would do that, but you would do that before the scene happened. Then all of a sudden, like people were physically harmed. You were asked to do things, all of a sudden you're on a set and, someone's having an STD outbreak or someone's hurt, or you're asked to do something that your agent knows that you say that's on your no list, or it's like endless amount of things. Girls showing up and not knowing that the director is going to say, "Hey, if you perform oral sex on me in this back room, I'll give you an extra $500. This is just part of the stuff. This is just how this is just how it goes." And you formulate this thinking that if there's a check and you're on a set and there's a camera in your vicinity, there is no consent, because your no doesn't have any validity, because the only thing that you can do is say yes. If that's the only thing that you can say yes to, anytime you say no, you just remove the opportunity to say yes to anything.
Yeah, and that's what I think people don't understand. Two things about the pornography industry. One is that first point you made, that pornography performers don't have the power that maybe actors do. They're not getting royalties and getting paid for every time that you are viewing this image on a free porn site. And back to that agency, we would never accept that an individual would have to deal with demands from their employer that are so inappropriate. Like, we would call that sexual harassment if your manager at Walmart asked for oral sex in the back room to get paid. Yet we know that people in a desperate financial situation, may say yes to that. I mean, that's under coercion, but they may, because they are desperate for money. And so we understand bosses can't do that, right? That's sexual harassment, that's abuse in the workplace. But there's this disconnect where people in the pornography industry are abused all the time, and we just accept it, or society accepts it, where we wouldn't in other contexts. And that brings me to something else I want to talk about, which is how, like, the internet has really exacerbated all of this. Because
Yeah.
to your original point of, reasonable restrictions, like, hey, like, you have to be 18 to buy cigarettes in a store. While pornography has the First Amendment sort of complicating things, before the internet, there was reasonable restrictions. If a child tried to buy a pornography magazine in a store, the shop owner would have to ask for ID and could go to jail if not asking for IDs. So there was restrictions on age to purchase this, to keep it away from kids. And even the really extremely, abusive, offensive pornography could be banned altogether, right? If it rose to the level of obscenity, it could be completely banned. But all of a sudden we have the internet, and the reality is we're not policing really any crimes on the internet. And so as a result, pornography's got this free pass. So people think and don't expect reasonable restrictions on pornography, when that wasn't historically the case, and we don't accept it in other contexts.
Yeah. So I mean, we go from a time. So when I was in the industry from like 2006 to 2013, and so around this time, you see cable TV starting to show things that are, not hardcore pornography, but not far from it. And you would see HBO After Dark and late night Cinemax, and that's where essentially you would know, don't watch cable TV. Don't watch Cinemax or HBO after 10 p.m. because if you do, you're going to see something inappropriate. So there was a kind of a line in the sand. It's like this is the place and the time domain that you'll find this stuff, and you shouldn't go there. And then to you're talking about, well, all of a sudden, the way that we consume content can change dramatically when we entered into streaming, and everything's accessible. But man, I would love to just hear from you. What progress have we made, and how have we gotten to where we've gotten? And obviously we've got so much further to go around age verification. Like does that exist even? Like what, I know there's on porn sites for the most part historically there's just a box that you click, yeah, I'm 18. And now that's somewhat changed, but I would love for you to just kind of walk through what has existed in the past and where are we trying to get to today?
Yeah, so What really disturbs me is there was no age verification on any of the most popular porn sites. And when I say that, I'm talking about both verifying that those consuming this are adults, because all these websites claim they're not targeting kids. They only want adults because everybody understands this is harmful to kids, but they had no age verification. But there was also not even age verification for the people performing in the videos.
Yeah.
Prior to like 2020, anybody with a cell phone could upload any sexually explicit material within minutes, which meant these websites were full of child pornography. And we all know, because of the state of the internet, that once something's online, it's almost impossible to get off. And so that's something else we can talk about a little bit later. But we're coming a long way by the fact that a light was shining on this and people are understanding it. I mean, if you have a hardcore pornography site, the big risks are that those involved may not have consented. And so that's sexual abuse, which is severe risk we should be very concerned about, or that the person's not of age. So that's child pornography. Those are really big risks. And the bare minimum of mitigating those risks would be asking for age consent. We absolutely have to demand that as a bare minimum for these websites. Luckily now, because of the public pressure and the lawsuits, Pornhub is finally, and just this year, finally requiring age and consent for everyone appearing in the video. But we have a long way to go, because that should just be the law. That should be the standard. And then
Yeah.
to the point of age verification for kids, so they're not accessing it, we still have a long way to go. It's so encouraging that several states have passed age verification laws in their state, saying, hey, if you're going to distribute pornography to our citizens in the state, you need to make sure they're adults. But there's been unbelievable pushback. In Texas, that law is actually going to be examined by the Supreme Court. So we'll see. I hope for a good result. I think, like I said, there's the First Amendment. So some of these laws are written better than others. There's complications, but I think the Texas law can pass because it wasn't aimed at targeting or preventing adults from accessing speech that they have a right to access. It's about protecting kids. And like I said, age verification is the bare minimum.
Yeah, it's like, well, in what instance would you let a 13-year-old walk into, a gas station and buy, a liter of vodka? You
Yeah.
wouldn't, so if that's the case, it shouldn't be different than what we've seen, just knowing that, what pornography does to the brain of a child. Average age of exposure has fluctuated between 11 to as young as 8 years old. It continues to trend downward. 11 years old around the same time that most kids get their first smartphone. So it's like, as soon as you have access to the internet, you're in danger, because it's not something that you have to look for. It's looking for you. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
So I would just say, yeah. And then so age verification, long way to go. It has been passed in some states, and it's not perfect, but it's something. And something that every time I'm anywhere with you guys, or anyone's wrestling with pornography on the internet and social media and all these things, what we hear time and time again is Section 230. Would you just explain to the person, maybe you're not familiar with policy, this is someone that is they're interested, they want to learn, they want to know more. Why is Section 230 so important, and what is it, and why does it need to change?
Thank you. Yeah, I am very passionate about this subject. In my opinion, Section 230 is probably the single biggest barrier to like eradicating sexual abuse online, particularly of children. What it is it's a federal law. So CDA stands for Communications Decency Act. It's super ironic. In 1996, when the internet was just getting started, like it was basically AOL. But even then, Congress had an outcry from parents concerned about their children in chat rooms and receiving inappropriate content. So they attempted to pass a law that would prevent children from accessing harmful content. And in that law, which had a lot of problems and should have been struck down because it wasn't well written, but it was, that was the purpose. The purpose was really to protect kids. And in negotiating this law, they added a provision as like a compromise to big tech. Of course, it wasn't even big tech then, but as a compromise to what they saw as a burgeoning new industry that they didn't want to be crushed. And that was this section 230, which said, for those websites who are making good faith efforts to actually take down bad content and prevent kids from seeing bad content, you can't be sued for what others post on your site. Because there was a really bad case in New York where a website was sued based on third-party content, right? That they really weren't responsible for. So that was the point of this bill, was like, you're doing a good job. It's actually called the Good Samaritan provision in the statute.
Wow.
But this statute was challenged constitutionally. It was struck down, but the irony is it had a severance clause, which means like any portion of it that's not unconstitutional could stay. So the whole thing was struck down except 230. So now we don't have any of the child protection. We just have this Good Samaritan law, section 230, that the courts have actually interpreted even more broadly than Congress originally intended, to mean basically blanket immunity for anything others post online. So if it's third-party content, meaning it's content that the website itself didn't post, which we know that's most website, right? Most websites, social media are a platform where others can post. And so courts have said, well, they're not responsible for anything that happens on their platform.
Right. So just an example, just to make it practical for someone, theoretically, someone could post child pornography on Twitter, and then that gets tons of views. Lots of people see it, lots of people share it, and then obviously, like, Twitter knows what's on their own platform, and they're not held liable for that.
And we don't even have to speak in hypotheticals on that, because that really happened in our case, right, Josh? And I'm sure you know about. And I'm happy to talk about it because it's super disturbing. And to your point of like the impact of lives, our client almost took his life. It was literally a miracle that his mother got a call from another child's mother that was, your son is talking about committing suicide, and she was able to intervene. But what happened is our client is a young boy. He was 13 when he was extorted by a predator on Snapchat into creating sexually explicit images of himself. So this is child pornography depicting a 13-year-old, explicit. He, got out of that situation, hoped to put it behind him. But then when he was 16 in high school, these images resurfaced as a compilation on Twitter, garnered massive views, over 160,000 views. Everyone in his high school saw it, right? And this is why he was contemplating suicide. But the worst part is, you know what? Twitter does know what's happening on their website. In fact, their success is dependent on them knowing everything that happens on their website.
Sure.
But even if there was any doubt, this child reported it multiple times. Twitter responded. So they actually said, he said explicitly, this is child pornography. I was 13, and this was made under coercion and threats. Twitter responds and says, well, show us your ID. So leaves what they've been told is child pornography. Again, a 13-year-old boy. Okay.
Yeah.
They've been told this is child pornography. They leave it online, ask for his ID. He provides it. I mean, most kids don't have IDs. Luckily, he did have a driver's license at this point, provides it. They said, we reviewed the material and we're not taking it down. Wow. So they reviewed child pornography, reviewed his complaint, reviewed his ID, left it up, and the court has said that they are immune. Like, that really happened. With all of those facts, the court said, that's third-party content. We don't care if it's contraband, which no one can possess. If this child had it on his phone, he could go to jail. But Twitter can have it in their possession and not even be sued for it, according to this court's incorrect ruling, in my opinion. So we're appealing that to the Ninth Circuit. But that's what I mean when I say that Section 230 is such a barrier to curbing this exploitation.
And then just kind of continue that conversation. So image-based sexual exploitation, that's something that among many things that we've been focused on, and there's an uprising in sextortion happening. Essentially, the scenario that you just talked about, someone creates a fake profile, interacts with a lot of the times, I think around the 90th percentile, young men, young men that are not 18, 13, 14, 15 years old. They're interacting with them. It's a fake profile. It's a pretty girl engaging them they get them to send a photo, they send the photo, then all of a sudden you have to send me money, or I'm going to show everyone on your friends list. I'm going to email everyone. I'm going to, I'm going to expose you unless you do, X. Obviously, that, extortion. So that's happening, not, just here and there. I
Right.
would love to, like, how prevalent is this? Because it sounds like, oh, this is so outlandish. Like, how could this be happening? I would love for you to talk about how prevalent that is and how often it's happening. And then also, why does AI make this even more dangerous?
Yeah, so it is so prevalent that the DOJ issued like an official warning that this has become literally a like a pandemic of crime against young men. Young both men and women, both girls and boys, but particularly young men are susceptible, and that's because there's even more shame around young men to talk about if something like this happens to them, and it can happen to literally anyone. There's a state representative in South Carolina, right? He's a man of privilege and power, wonderful family. His son was an All-American, popular kid in high school. This sextortion starts in the evening. He's in his phone in his room, right? He thinks he's with a hot girl, sends a pic, is being extorted. By the time his parents go check on him in the morning, he's dead. He had
Mm,
killed himself within the space of hours. That's how powerful this is. And I posit that part of the reason it's so powerful is these teenagers know that if those images do get distributed, they're never coming down. Not
right,
only the shame that they're worried about with their inner circle, but that's a permanent harm. And
right.
that's why another reason that 230 is such a problem, because these platforms have no incentive to do the right thing. And that's what we see time and time again. When we report to these platforms, we ask them to take down abusive content of adults, children, anybody. They just don't do it. And they don't spend any time trying to protect kids to prevent something like that from happening because it costs money. And why would they do something that costs money and potentially loses them? Not only does it cost money to do the safety, but it loses money because the bad actors are off the site, right? The engagement's not happening. And they can't be sued. There's no liability risk. That's a calculation that no business will make in favor of posterity. They're not going to do it. And that's why 230 is really creating a reversal of incentives, where instead of incentivizing good behavior, it's incentivizing bad corporate behavior. And it's so ironic because they act like they can't do this. And even like your everyday person, when I talk about this, will be like, well, how could they monitor everything that's happening online? Part of that is the tech industry tries to make it seem like everything's harder than it really is. And we don't understand the technology. Of course, this isn't difficult. And two, people don't realize that they do this every day with copyright. Every single day, they detect and remove copyright material within seconds. You
Oh
could
yeah,
never.
it's like, well, number one, the monetization strategy that exists on Pornhub, or let me back up. So the monetization strategy that exists on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, that came from pornography doing that first.
Yeah.
So it's like we are naive to think that they're, less intelligent people that are operating this industry. They hire the best of the best because they are, a multi-billion-dollar industry. So do they have the AI technology to identify these things? Certainly. They certainly do. To your point, they don't care, and why would they? So just thinking about that. And so as our time comes to a close, and it's obviously we need to do it like a part 2, 3, 4, and 5. Just thinking about two things. Um, I asked you around AI. So why is AI potentially, it is helpful in a lot of ways. It is a useful piece of technology, but why does AI have the opportunity to make everything that what we've seen happen worse? And how do you think pornography has played a part in shaping culture?
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those like exponent factors, right? It can take something and increase it exponentially for good or for bad. And unfortunately, that means, if you have our internet is full of images of you, images of me, images of children, and it's full of the most hardcore pornography you could possibly imagine. AI models are going to learn from that. So they could take your image, my image, children's images, and hardcore pornography and create unlimited abuse material without anyone's consent at a pace we could almost not even fathom. And if you think in terms of what laws we have right now, they're not caught up. So if your children and everyone's child, there could be child pornography made of every American child within days. And how could the DOJ get rid of that material? How could we curb the societal effects of our exposure to this child pornography and these children being a part of that against their will? There's just so many things that can happen. And I actually spoke to this woman who a lot of deep fake sort of AI pornography was made of her to harass her. And she said, people just don't understand, like, it feels like I've been violated. It
Yeah.
feels like that. It really is harmful to the person that it depicts. And we all know that consuming child pornography is harmful for society. So it just has that ability to make things exponentially, like the internet did, make things exponentially more dangerous. So
Yeah.
we need to use AI for good, and we need our laws to catch up to that. And then your last question, I think, was it, how is
Yeah,
pornography?
how do you think that how do you think the progression of pornography has shaped culture today? Like when we think about sex, when we think about intimacy, when we think about relationships, like everything in that bucket, how do you think pornography has shaped our culture?
I'll use two really current examples of what I think. I think that pornography has desensitized us to sexual violence and has altered the way that we view sex, what we should accept in a sexual relationship, and how we should treat people in a sexual relationship. One of those examples is there was a recent study that came out that an alarming number of women, I don't want to misstate the statistic, but I think it was like 1 in 3 young women in their 20s had been strangled on their first sexual encounter. That's directly from the content that is porn. Men were not strangling on a first sexual encounter as a natural instinct. That is them modeling sexual pornographic content, like you were saying earlier. And then another example would be the Giselle Pelicot case in France, where that woman, her husband of 40 years was having men come and rape her while she was drugged and asleep. And I think it was over 30 men, maybe 60 men. It was an unbelievable amount of men from her community coming and raping her. She was unconscious, and he was filming that and he was distributing that. That is extreme antisocial behavior. And what was most alarming is these were really average, normal guys doing this. This was the man in the bakery down the street. This was a fireman, a nurse. And by all accounts, her husband was a normal guy. So to me, and I think there's facts in that case that show that this is an escalation of behavior of men that would not have behaved that way, acting out in that way because of an escalation due to pornography use and consumption of that kind of material.
Yeah. So I mean, we've had a really fast, deep, probably abrasive to the person listening to this, in an inappropriate way. I think there's certain conversations that should bruise you, in a way so that you're aware of how powerful this industry is and how destructive its reality is on so many people, specifically kids.
Yeah.
So I would just say, after, hearing all this knowledge, all the data, all the stories, the emotions that people are probably feeling, what is just a few takeaways that you want someone to kind of, okay, you've heard this conversation, what can I do? Like I'm hearing this and it's like, man, I feel propelled to do something. Maybe it's the person, it's like I've been consuming this content and I had no idea. This is going to prompt me to stop. Maybe this is a person that I want to protect kids. How can I help? Maybe it's the person that you're passionate about lobbying for things and you didn't understand that legislation has a seat at the table. I would just love for you to just give us something to do, Dani. Like how can we help? How can we contribute? How can we, step into the ring of this fight?
Yeah, well, one, I would say go to your website, listen to your podcast, come to ours, learn more, and share this with your community, because this is really one of those situations where there's power in community, and we engage our community to call out that we want this to be a public health crisis. We want protections in place. And on our website, we have a lot of policies and we help you engage with them. So right now is the time. There are a few bills. Finally, Congress is waking up to this. COSA is the Kids Online Safety Act, which would require social media companies to build in child safety by design. Let's pass that. And we have a quick ability on our website for you to send a message to your congressperson. Tell your congressperson that this is important to you, that as a constituent, you want this. And next year, look out, because NCOSE is on a mission to take down 230, whether that is to sunset it. There was a bill introduced that would just, hey, this thing is retired. It no longer is in effect, or let's radically modify it. So we will have many opportunities for you to engage in that fight. And I say, tell everyone you know about Section 230 and that you want it out. The internet will survive like every other industry does, and it will be safer if it can be sued and held accountable.
Yeah, praise God. Yeah, well, thank you so much. And I'm just so thankful for you as a friend, as someone who has helped me think better and to know more so that I can speak with more wisdom, more insight. And I'm just so thankful for your friendship and thankful for everyone at NCOSE and all that they do, from the law team to the people who are in the weeds all the time. I'm so, so thankful for you guys.
Me too, Joshua. We'll have to do this again, please. Let's do it. Let's do part two.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you so much.